Well, hello, welcome to this week's edition of the City Update. I'm your host, Mark Aaron, Multimedia Design Manager for the City of Danville. This week, we're down in the River District, Main Street right behind us, and the property directly behind us is where the old downtowner used to stand. Of course, that is long gone now, and a new project may be taking place here behind us, and that's what we're going to discuss on today's show. And joining me is Kent Shelton, of course, the former city engineer for the City of Danville, and as of this taping, Kent retired about 3 days ago, but he's still working on projects representing the city because there was a lot of projects that Kent was involved in when he left, and so Kent's going to stay on board with the city for a little longer to take care of these projects, and one of those being the one here behind us, and it's concerning a parking deck. We all know parking is an issue here in the River District, and the more the merrier. So the city is looking at maybe constructing a parking deck on this piece of property here behind us. Now, today's show, Kent's going to tell us a little bit about that. And Kent, I know we're currently working with an architect on about an 8-week study, I guess a feasibility study, to see what the costs would be involved to create a parking deck. And I know they gave a presentation to some stakeholders in the community. We're going to share that presentation with our viewers today. But tell us a little bit about the firm we're currently working with and what's going to be detailed during this 8-week study.
Well, you know, Mark, probably 2 or 3 years ago, a consultant looked at the parking in the River District, parking downtown, to see how much was available, how much was public and how much private parking we had, how the parking was being used. And out of that, if the River District continues to grow and revitalize, then he identified the need for a parking deck and looked at several sites, but this was the preferred site right here where the old downtown was. Right. So the city wanted to take that a little further and just see if it was feasible to build a parking structure on this site. It's kind of a long, narrow site. Yeah. What it would look like, we wanted to have something, not just a concrete box, but something that would be complementary to all the other buildings and the architecture on Main Street. Yeah. And finally, as you said, how much it would cost. So that's what we hired a firm called SKA Consulting from Greensboro, and they've designed many different parking decks, different types of decks. And so the first thing they're doing is a feasibility study and a schematic design. Actually looking at the site in detail and coming up with a couple of different layouts and presenting some options to the city.
And you're going to see those layouts on today's show. And as we mentioned, we did have a couple of meetings that were held in City Hall just last week to get input from the community as well, right?
That's right. That's important to see what the community wants out of the parking deck, how it will operate, and a lot about the facade of it, what it will look like. And
I thought it was interesting, some of the comments that came out of that. The former Burton building that used to be on this site, very historic building, and I think the consultants are kind of trying to weave that into the new property and the new project, right?
Right. This particular corner is such a landmark corner here on Main Street and in downtown Danville, and so by the very attractive Burton Hotel being here, the architect is trying to pull some of those architectural features into the parking structure.
Very good. Well, as I mentioned, the consultants did give a presentation to some stakeholders in the community, and what I'd like to do now is share that entire presentation with you. They've got a PowerPoint that shows some schematics, and they've got a good 3D rendering of what the parking deck will actually look like if it sits on this piece of property. So what we'll do is we'll take you out to City Hall now and share that presentation with you.
Again, my name is Matt Messick with Walter Robbs, part of the design team here. And just want to kind of walk you through some of the steps that we've gone through over the last couple of weeks to kind of quickly bring you up to speed, give you some background information, and kind of give you the framework for which we're going to be showing you some elevation ideas today. I want to start with an image here of a model of downtown of the site. And you'll notice the primary streets that are involved with this particular site are Main Street, just to orient you, running east and west, Union Street north and south, and Spring Street to the north. So this is the proposed lot. It comes all the way over to the parking lot edge right here beside the bank. If you're familiar with that surface lot, we'll be coming right to the edge of that. And it also comes up and pretty much nestles right up against the entrance into the transfer station for the public transportation. And so we're studying this particular intersection as well, as this will have some impact into that entrance. So we're working on dovetailing that design together. The deck here is oriented primarily north-south that we're proposing. It's a 3-bay scheme, so this third skinny bay is actually the bay that will handle all the ramping functions to go load and unload from the deck. And then these 2 bays, which run long ways this way, this is all flat level parking, kind of orient you. These 2 smaller gray rectangles in the lower left and upper right-hand corner are the circulation towers that contain elevators and stairs and connect the 6 levels of the parking deck. The site slopes approximately 28 feet from the southwest corner to the northeast corner. There's about an 18-foot differential from the corner here at Main and Union all the way down to Spring and Union. So vertical change in slope is a big challenge in trying to work this out. Another opportunity, which is a very exciting opportunity for the design, is this gray bar here that we're delineating, which is a commercial bar that occurs along Main Street, and that would house a potential restaurant space, commercial space, and some retail space that actually we're proposing wraps around the corner and comes down Union Street. So this gives you kind of a framework, a frame of reference to understand the project scope and how it orients to the site. Of course, some key buildings, the Masonic Temple here to the southeast, diagonally across the street, very significant. Many of the 3 to 4 story storefronts, very nicely detailed and in good shape, historic fabric along Main Street. So with that, I wanted to very quickly review the visual preference survey that we shared with the group last week. It was a smaller committee, and we got some very valuable feedback. And I want to kind of share the results of that visual preference survey with you. And I think this will help frame the discussions as we unveil the initial pass at the elevations. So we conducted this visual preference survey to pull out the salient facts about scale, materials, architectural details that will be applicable to the new deck design. And so the first question that we asked the group last week was, what significant buildings along Main Street do we need to kind of take cues from? What are the kind of details that we need to draw from as we look to the new design of the deck? Does it need to relate to the fabric of Main Street? And if so, are there key elements or key details that we need to cue in on? So time and time again, we heard arched windows were a nice feature to kind of play off of. The treatment of the corner here was a nice way to address that. Awnings, punched windows, large transparent storefronts, kind of layering detailing from large to small. As you go up the building, bigger open storefronts into smaller punched windows as you go higher up. Probably the best example of that is this image here. And then we looked along Union Street and asked the same question. And here again, we saw the large transparent ground level. Open retail was very important, trying to replicate something similar to what we saw at the Masonic Temple with overhangs and awnings, big storefronts, and then also recessed entryways. Some of the buildings there along Union as well. We also asked this small committee, were there other buildings in downtown that were significant in terms of architectural detailing or monumentality that we should kind of take cues from? And we had a lengthy discussion about that as well. That discussion very quickly gravitated towards what was formerly the Hotel Burton, which was on the site of the proposed parking deck. And this is really where we centered a lot of our discussion and detail. There were so many aspects of this project that really not only addressed the opportunities on the site, but pulled from the memories and the nostalgia and just the important iconic character that this building could take on. Some of the features of this building that the committee really played up on were the importance of a tower element on this corner, a very iconic destination type corner in downtown, a very important landmark corner that had a history to it. It's been destroyed, but could that be replicated? and make reference to past buildings. The curved shape of that facade on the corner, how it softly turns the corner, how it's recessed. This used to be an old insurance office. There were barber shops, restaurants, office. Well, this was actually residential areas up here. And then the second to the fifth level was the hotel. There's a large arched opening here reminiscent of the Romanesque revival architecture, which this building is modeled after. Rusticated stonework on the base. So many rich details of this former hotel. Also the scale of windows, the arched punched openings that we see, the scale from large to small, the layering and detailing of the cornice, combination of flat roofs, and then of course this monumental tower. So needless to say, the mixture of the neoclassical details that we see in some of the columns, these recessed balconies, the Romanesque with the large arches, there's a lot of detail to draw on. We continue to ask about the scale. You remember I showed you the dark gray bar at the bottom of the plan that shows the proposed location for commercial retail, and we were asking what is the appropriate scale of that to be, knowing the businesses around this site. And so we kind of ended up reaching consensus with a 3-story type scale space, which is indicative of what you're seeing here. Again, we went back and asked that question, how important is that corner to maintain as an open destination spot where you could actually enter into maybe a potential restaurant or a retail area as opposed to making it a circulation tower? And everyone seemed to agree that it needed to be an open, preserved space for a restaurant or some major entryway into a space. We then asked the question about scale at the street and whether or not the parking deck, in this case, should be flush with the street. The parking should be out in line with the retail commercial, or whether we should begin to step the parking back and create opportunities for patios, arcades, covered areas that were more pedestrian friendly. And people tended to gravitate more towards the right image there. This is an example of a deck in Staunton, Virginia, where it's actually a parking deck, believe it or not. And this architect successfully broke up the facade and replicated the facades of similar storefront buildings that are across the street to kind of make it blend in with the scale of the area. A lot of folks on the committee said this is the kind of scale that the architecture of the deck, especially along Main Street, needed to have that feel and that flavor. So it's not hitting you in the face with a big imposing structure, but has the delicacy of what you would find in a storefront. We reviewed just the fundamentals of traditional architecture, understanding that the base would probably draw cues from the past, having a base, probably a limestone or a rusticated base that would be typical of what you would find in a Romanesque style of architecture, a middle, which is primarily for the parking, and then capped off by some significant top. In this case, it's a pretty heavy cornice that was playing off of some details of other buildings in town. I think we all agreed that this particular cornice was a little bit too heavy, and we're not recommending it for what we would be doing here. But nonetheless, the base, middle, top formula certainly would apply. So then the question was asked, this is actually the corner, this is Main Street, and then Union is going down. How much retail do we need to carry down Union Street? We felt strongly that it needed to go down and activate that street as well, and not just occur along Main Street. So we were looking at the balance of how far to take the retail down Union. In terms of breaking up the facade of such a large mass, we wanted to ask the question of, is it more important to articulate the volume, breaking it up into horizontals like you see here, or was it more appropriate for Danville to look at a structure that may be more articulated vertically, setting it up into masses or breaking it up into masses vertically? Everybody seemed to gravitate more towards the image on the right. Then we had a little bit more elongated discussion about the tower. We showed some other examples of buildings downtown, be it churches or factories or office buildings, and everybody continued to gravitate back to the Hotel Burton and just said that it seemed to be the appropriate response given the history of the site, given the softness and delicacy of turning the corner, and just the unique element of that tower that stood out from any of the other towers. A reference to that history seemed to be very important. We talked about the three primary street sides of the deck being Main, Union, and Spring. And then we have that interior deck side that backs up to the parking lot. And I was asking the folks the question of whether or not it would be acceptable to see any exposed concrete structure. Because oftentimes on those inner sides, to be honest with you, a lot of times we leave that open and exposed. And the committee said they felt very strongly that this deck needed to be covered with architecture on all four sides. So I think most people in the room are very familiar with the mural. Just to give you a reference, this is at the corner of Spring Street, which runs this way, and then Union, which runs up this way. And the transfer station is over to the right. These buildings will need to be demolished to make room for the new parking deck. Part of that will need to be finding a home for a replicated version of this mural. And so we were tasked with finding another location for this to occur, and we're going to show that to you. Looking at the stair towers, we've got two distinct stair towers, elevator towers, in the design, and we wanted to get a feel for how important it was to enclose those towers, be it with glass or with louvers, or leave it open. Everyone unanimously was pushing for a glass tower, just to protect from the elements, to have a conditioned space, and for that level of security, that you felt more safe in an enclosed glass-stained stairwell. Then we got into a long discussion about how you would actually operate inside the deck, how the ramping would occur. There's two options. One is the one on the right, which is a park on-ramp situation, which is a more gradual slope of 5 to 6%. You can actually park on that ramp as you're going up. So if you see a space, you can pull in. This is a much more maneuverable ramp, especially for decks that are maybe the first deck coming to a city where people are just starting to use a deck for the first time. More usable, it's less expensive. One problem with that solution, though, is that it doesn't load or unload as quick as the example on the left, which is a speed ramp. This is a much greater slope, but it exits cars a lot quicker. You can't park on it because it's just too steep. So we were asking which one would be more appropriate, and here again, everybody gravitated more towards the image on the right. We didn't feel that there were any events in downtown that would necessitate having to go with a speed ramp on the left, because parking would be dispersed throughout the day. And the last slide we showed talked about security at the ground level. Everybody's concerned about security and the feeling of safety, or you're just not going to use the deck. So we commonly employ putting in pretty much full height grills that cover the entire openings at the ground level. This is an example of a frame system where we'd have like a grate which fills up that space. And so you'd actually be able to see through the deck, but it's a physical barrier, not a visual, but a physical barrier to give you that sense of security. And so we're proposing doing that as well in this deck. So with that information in hand, we then turned our sights to the massing model on the site just to begin to understand how this building masses out. We didn't want it to be overpowering along Main Street, but it needed to fit in terms of the scale and the context. And then we wanted to study the impact of the scale of the deck being 6 stories on the back side. So if this works, I want to just give you a sense 3-dimensionally of what that looks like on the site. So believe it or not, in our opinion, the deck, even at 6 stories, has a nice fit here, scale-wise. You know, given this double height retail space on the ground level and additional optional office level above that, it seems to fit in very nicely along Main Street. As you turn the corner, there's opportunity for additional retail space. And then we're going to talk a little bit real quick, if I can key you in on the entrances into the deck. There's no vehicular entrances along Main Street, and the committee felt that was very important to not have that. So we have 2 other entrances. One is off of Union Street, which you see here. It's about mid-block of the long elevation. And then the second entrance is off of Spring Street here beside the transfer station, which you can see right here. And so this will get reconfigured. It'll be drive lanes in. And then here again, you can see this outer bay, which is interior, not non-street, is where the ramping will occur. And our understanding is that this stair tower here will kind of serve this zone of downtown, you know, as residential and other commercial uses come more online and the demand for more parking grows. This stair tower will feed this quadrant, and then the other stair tower will feed and activate Main Street. So we feel that those 2 entrances will certainly meet the capacity of this parking deck based on the roughly 630 spaces that we're looking at. One other thing I want to show you here in massing is, if you're familiar with the mural, it's roughly in this parking lot where my hand cursor is moving right now. We're proposing moving it out here to this facade where the entrance into the deck is going to be. So it's actually going to be pretty much in the same location facing along Spring Street here. And so we think this is kind of an optimal location. There's also another opportunity for a mural as you're coming down Main Street. Main Street at night. This facade right here, it's a solid wall, and there's some talk, at least discussion, about another potential mural that could occur on this facade. So this will be very prominent as you come down Main Street, heading down towards the river. And so that's another opportunity, but we have to maintain the mural for the transfer station essentially here off of Spring Street. So just kind of give you your bearings. When you look at the elevations, we're going to talk about some of these elements: entrances into the deck, the stair towers, entry on the corner. The one thing that struck us on this particular massing model when we looked at it was we felt that we really kind of lost the opportunity. We had not capitalized on the importance of this corner. It just, looking at this massing almost like a Play-Doh model, there was just nothing here that really stood out as a strong, pronounced entry. We were missing that opportunity. So when we got into the elevation studies, we really wanted to play up the notion of a tower, strong entryway, destination feel. You don't get that from the massing model, but hopefully you'll get that from the elevations that we're about to show you. I'm now going to show you very quickly 3 boards, and these 3 boards are replicated in hard copy over here. I've got them turned around because I didn't want to distract you, but these are visual preferences or visual precedents that we actually use to develop the elevations. Several images of the Hotel Burton. This is a 1909 image, which clearly shows the entrance into the hotel with this arched entrance. The rounded corner, the recessed entry, the tower element, which is very important to this corner, really sets it apart as a unique, iconic corner destination core of downtown. Very important corner. Kind of reestablishes the importance of that. This is an example, which you can see better on the board over here, of a recessed entry, which gives you some layering and some safety and some buffer as you come out of the proposed stair tower onto Main Street. And we're looking at activating Main Street with some recessed areas for seating, for outdoor dining, other functions that may occur. These were just some other examples of large-scale masses that were broken down with more of a vertical articulation, and some other examples of buildings in downtown Roanoke that we felt were of visual importance. So without further ado, let me show you our initial thoughts on the elevations. I'm going to explain these, and then we're going to flip the boards and give you guys a chance to stand up and come over here and look at real close to the original drawings and have a chance to look at them in more detail. But this is the initial concept for the Main Street elevation. This is at the corner of Union and Main. This is the entrance corner where we see this being that entry destination for either a restaurant or an important retail space. Introduction of awnings or canopies along here to provide cover, potentially recessing this storefront back, but large expanses of storefront. And then this is a potential for a secondary retail space that could occur if a restaurant doesn't need this whole space here. You could subdivide this into two spaces on the ground level. This is roughly a double height scale space, so it would have a nice, comfortable feel to it. Above that, we would propose doing a layer of office space. We think that this particular location will really become significant and important and desirable, and people will want to be in this building for its location and for its importance. We see that as an opportunity to grab that now. This is the stair tower, elevator tower that empties out onto Main Street. This is the iconic tower, which can also serve as an observation deck. You're going to be really up high. We get really great views back to the river of downtown, and could be kind of a unique destination point. And this is just a bar of spandrel at the top of the deck. The parking would be open at this level, at level 6. And so then there's two variations of the Main Street elevation that occur after this. These are just different treatments of the facade using double arched windows, looking at potentially varying the shape of the parapet. That was a suggestion that one of the committee members made last week, to look at taking some cues from some buildings downtown to change that up. Looking at some changes of how to treat the tower. If we didn't want to mimic the Hotel Burton, this is a different option, but similarly it could be an observation tower. And all these, we still see that corner being an important arrival destination type piece. And then this is the last one. Here again, just some variations, but keeping that same theme of a double height, single story with the office level above. Just a different look for the tower element, for the corner tower as well as the stair elevator tower. Moving to the opposite end of the building, this is the Spring Street elevation. So this is the full 6 stories expressed on the back of the deck. This is all parking deck. You can see it's articulated with grills. So down at the street level, you would have security grills where people would feel safe. This is a glassed-in stairwell that would empty out at the street level. This is the primary, one of the 2 primary entrances into the deck that you would get onto the park on ramp bay. And then this large rectangular area here is a footprint placeholder for that mural that needs to be relocated. This is the long side of the deck looking along Union Street. Here again, we think it's important to articulate this facade and make it feel like it's part of the storefront, hide that structure behind the deck, and make it feel more like it's part of the fabric of what's downtown. We are suggesting this is the commercial zone of the building, and so it terminates here. This is an independent structure for the commercial retail. It could be steel frame. It could have its own floor-to-floor heights. There's a lot of freedom in keeping that a separate structure, be cheaper. And then from here back is cast-in-place concrete, which has a typical floor-to-floor height of 11'4", which would provide handicapped accessibility to all the levels. We've got 3 bays of retail that would occur on the ground level, and of course, based on the grade going from 18 feet at this corner to this corner, these are going to have to step just a little bit as we go down the hill. And then this is the main entry point into the deck from Union Street. This is a variation of that articulated pattern where rather than having smaller punched windows, we have a taller, kind of hierarchical structure, a taller window at the bottom with medium windows and then a smaller punched window at the top. So this is kind of more of the traditional hierarchy that you would see going from large to small. So we're just beginning to study those potential patterns, and would like to get your feedback on which one you think is more appropriate.
Well, a great presentation by SKA Consulting there, and I think they did a great job, especially like the 3D rendering. They were able to place the parking deck right on the property, and you got to see a 3D angle from every direction here on Main Street, and it looks like it could be a very nice parking deck, and like you said, incorporating retail along Main Street on the first floor of the deck. So, Kent, let's talk about the next step in the process, because I know this feasibility study will just evidently let us know if it is feasible to have an actual deck on this piece of property, and then also the cost involved. So where do we go from here?
Well, as I say, they're scheduled to finish their study in probably about another month and a half. Then it will be presented to the River District Design Committee and City Council at a work session. City Council may have some questions and want some modifications to it, but out of that, we'll just have to wait and see how things develop here in the River District.
And again, if you would like your input on this project, you can always contact Public Works 799-5245, and they'll be able to get you in contact with the engineering department and with the right people that are handling this project, because as we mentioned, public input is always important when it comes to these projects, and this is no exception. So again, if you'd like to provide your input, feel free to call our Public Works department. Well, Kent, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today, and we're so glad you decided to stay on with the city for a short time after your retirement to follow through with these projects. Your expertise is always needed, and again, we thank you for coming on today's show, and if this does happen to get off the ground, we'd love to have you back on the show to talk more about the project.
I'll be glad to.
All right, great. And thank you at home for watching. Until next week, have a great day.